Thanks, Annie. I'm really pleased to introduce Professor Christopher Hodson to you. He is speaking today on Girodet's Shadow, the Legacies of the Haitian Revolution. Christopher Hodson is an associate professor in the Department of History here at BYU. He is the author of The Acadian Diaspora, an 18th Century History, and with Brett Rushforth, Beyond the Ocean, France and the Atlantic World, from the Crusades to the Age of Revolution, forthcoming with Oxford University Press. He is foremost a historian of the French Atlantic colonial world, and his current work focuses on eyewitness accounts of the Haitian Revolution. He's also a remarkably interesting and generous individual. He's a volunteer instructor at the Utah State Prison through the Utah Prison Education Project. He also is affiliated with the Kennedy Center as the coordinator of BYU's program in Canadian Studies. Please join me in welcoming Professor Christopher Hodson.
Thank you so much, Quinn. First of all, thank you to everyone for coming, and thank you, of course, to the Kennedy Center and all of the people who work here who make these lectures possible. The Kennedy Center has always been such an oasis here on campus of good thinking and collegiality, and I hope it's able to remain one. Before I launch into my talk, I want to pause for a moment to take Clint Eastwood's good advice from the 1973 classic Magnum Force. A man's got to know his limitations. And I've got any number of limitations we might discuss, but as far as this lecture goes, a couple stand out. First and foremost, like Quinn said, I'm a historian of the early modern French Atlantic. And while I've done extensive research on the French colony of Saint-Domingue, which is today's Haiti, from its 17th century origins through the revolutionary upheavals of the 1790s and Haitian independence, what I'm not is a historian of Haiti, which is not to say I don't know anything about 19th, 20th, and 21st century Haiti. I do, but I don't speak or read Haitian Creole, the primary language of nearly all Haitians then as now. And for a variety of reasons sad to contemplate, I've never been to Haiti. Moreover, when I do research, it's often in the archive of the French state, a French state that throughout the 19th and 20th centuries seized, collected, preserved, and categorized documents from Saint-Domingue and Haiti in the service of justifying colonial rule and racial slavery, and later on of denigrating on white supremacist grounds the black rulers and inhabitants of its lost colony. So it's important for me / us to recognize that A, unlike every other modern revolution, the history of the Haitian Revolution has mainly been written by its French and English-speaking losers. And B, there's a long and ongoing history of Haitian historians who have worked to counter the dominance of those narratives that render silent and inert the victors in the Haitian Revolution. And here I've put up on the screen a few recent and some classic books on the Haitian Revolution. And I would encourage you to read one of those books. They're really good, and they will help you far more than this lecture ever will to understand what Haiti is and why it's important. So, with all that said, and before trying to describe the many legacies of the Haitian Revolution, let's talk a little about what that revolution actually was. The Haitian Revolution takes place here. This is the French colony of Saint-Domingue, the western third or so of the island of Hispaniola. Originally inhabited by indigenous Taino peoples and first invaded and colonized by the Spanish beginning in the late 15th century, this then backwater region of Hispaniola was ceded to France by a treaty in 1697. 18th century Saint-Domingue then grew explosively, becoming by the 1760s and 1770s the most profitable European colony in the world. By the 1780s, Saint-Domingue produced about 40% of the sugar consumed in Europe, 60% of the coffee, and substantial percentages of Europe's cotton and indigo. Many of the wealthiest people and places in France on the eve of the French Revolution were those that had invested in Saint-Domingue and its plantation economy, an economy that, of course, ran on the coerced labor of enslaved Africans and the murderous violence needed to sustain it. Saint-Domingue's booming plantation economy made for radical demographic imbalance. In 1789, which is the year that the French Revolution began, Saint-Domingue's population was composed of about 30,000 white colonists, about 30,000 free people of color and mixed-race ancestry, and about 500,000 enslaved Africans. The average life expectancy for an enslaved person once they reached Saint-Domingue was about 7 years. These short and harsh lives were a function of torture in the service of agricultural production, sexual violence toward enslaved women and children, disease, malnutrition, and exposure. Such mortality rates necessitated the importation year after year of ever greater numbers of enslaved captives, most of whom came from a broad arc of African territory stretching from the Senegal River to the Kingdom of the Congo in West Central Africa. As a result, by the late 1780s, 2/3 of Saint-Domingue's enslaved population had been born not in the colony or elsewhere in the Caribbean, but in Africa. Also by 1789, a long tradition of multifaceted resistance among Saint-Domingue's enslaved people existed alongside a not quite so long tradition among Saint-Domingue's whites, led by its powerful planter class, of insisting on strict racial hierarchy in law, social and marital relations, and culture as a means of preserving slavery, even if such racial thinking risked alienating the colony's 30,000 or so free people of color and mixed-race ancestry, some of whom were themselves slave and plantation owners. Between 1789 and 1791, as Saint-Domingue's free people, again white, mixed race, and free people of color, argued with France's new revolutionary government and among themselves over race, rights, free trade, and a host of other issues, the colony's slaves were watching. And on the night of August 22nd, 1791, a core group of 200 or so enslaved men and women on the northern plain, an area of especially rich sugar plantations just south of the city of Cap-Français, executed a pre-planned, highly coordinated uprising, setting their plantations ablaze and killing their enslavers. Over the next 2 years, the revolt that began on the northern plain overspread the colony. Black and mixed-race insurgents built networks of armed encampments and trade outposts throughout Saint-Domingue's interior from which they waged war against France's colonial government, which found itself pinned to an ever-diminishing slice of the colony's coastlines. What was that insurgency like to experience? Well, on March 19, 1792, Ambroise, a slave in Fort Dauphin on Saint-Domingue's northern coast, got an up-close look when, while tending his owner's cattle, he was kidnapped by 4 insurgents and shoved onto a footpath leading from his owner's home into the interior. After a long walk, the 5 men reached a plantation once known as Le Roi, the King, now an armed camp run by Georges Biassou, you see there on the left. Dressed in an orange military uniform and a jet-black silver-flecked scarf, Biassou looked Ambroise over and told his captors to keep moving. So they walked again, this time to a rum distillery once owned by the Perrault family. Here, Ambroise found another camp, run by Huel, one of Biassou's subordinates. Demanding to know why Ambroise had not joined the insurgency, Huel clapped him in irons. Then, out of nowhere, a woman appeared. She was young, of medium height, and, quote, very light-skinned. Garnet bracelets covered both her arms from wrist to elbow, flashing as she stormed toward Ambroise, spewing insults with every stride. She kicked him hard, over and over again, calling him a beggar, a scoundrel, and declaring that were it up to her, he'd be executed then and there. But luckily for Ambroise, it wasn't up to her, and a few days later, after more walking and observing, he escaped and made his way back to Fort Dauphin, where French officials, the first white men he'd seen in a week, hung on every word of his account. And those words illuminated a white world gutted and repurposed by people of color. Once sites of racial torture in the service of Atlantic capitalism, the plantations of Fort Dauphin Parish had become engines of black production for insurgent needs. As Ambroise revealed, the once enslaved men and women now running the Perrault distillery pumped out great quantities of the cheap rum known as tafia, which was, quote, carried off and distributed in the different camps each day. Once allowed to carry arms only under white supervision, or barred from doing so altogether, mixed race and black insurgents now displayed symbols of rank, brandished swords, and manned cannon in their own armies. Once subject to sumptuary laws aimed at keeping European clothing and finery off black bodies, the men and women of the camps, as Biassou's flashy jacket and the woman's garnet bracelets revealed, made forbidden fashions their own. And in an inversion of the process by which millions of men and women had been seized in the African interior and marched into slavery, by the sea, Saint-Domingue's revolutionaries had kidnapped Ambroise out of captivity on the coast and into freedom, their freedom, deep in the colony's heart. So if you're looking for radical change in the age of revolution, this is where it is. I often tell my students, think of Virginia, for example, 15 years before American independence. What is it? Well, it's a semi-autonomous, kind of quasi-republic, set within a larger confederation known as the British Empire, and it's run by really wealthy white guys who own slaves and grow tobacco, and who expect deference from their social subordinates. Now consider Virginia 15 years after American independence. What is it? Well, it's a semi-autonomous quasi-republic set within a larger confederation known as the United States that's run by rich white guys who own slaves and who expect social deference from their lessers, okay? So in some respects, the notion of a world turned upside down that we've all been subjected to via Hamilton, which was a real American Revolution song, is nonsense, except here. This is where the world has been turned upside down. Now, between 1791 and 93, Saint-Domingue's insurgents fought against revolutionary France with funding and support from the Spanish, who, like the British, hoped to destabilize the once hyper-productive colony and eventually take it for themselves. But in a series of proclamations that began in Saint-Domingue itself and culminated in Paris on February 4, 1794, France transformed the insurgency and reoriented its loyalties by becoming the first European empire to abolish slavery in all of its territories. Although there were plenty of French revolutionaries with anti-slavery and even abolitionist bona fides, this was, as they say, a business decision. And the business was war. If France embraced black insurgents as citizens, one French speaker declared to the National Convention during the debate over emancipation, the Republic would soon dominate, quote, all of the Mexican archipelago by using insurgents turned citizens against its enemies. Leaping to the speaker's box, the revolutionary politician Georges Danton soliloquized for what seemed like a really, really long time about universal liberty, but soon remembered the hard truth of race. He recommended that France make itself the, quote, arbiter of black liberty, which somehow existed outside of universal liberty, by ensuring that emancipation was, quote, useful to mankind without endangering it. And then came the kicker. Today, Danton sneered, the British are dead. And indeed, France's multiracial armies spent the next couple of years storming across the Eastern Caribbean. Mere rumors of their arrival sowed dread on British, Spanish, and Dutch islands that sympathetic slave revolts were soon to follow. France's main weapons in this newfangled conflict, declared one British naval officer, were, quote, the note of emancipation of the French government and, quote, the guillotine. The most important consequence of France's emancipation proclamations, however, was the about-face it provoked in men such as Toussaint Louverture, a formerly enslaved coachman who had risen to become Saint-Domingue's insurgency's most important and gifted military leader, and in the ordinary men and women who made up the insurgency's backbone. From 1794 to 1798, as the promise of emancipation met the demands of an era of war and disorder, Toussaint consolidated power for himself and a cadre of loyal black, mixed-race, and French military and political leaders, while largely driving back Spanish and British assaults on Saint-Domingue. He also instituted new and controversial policies designed to restart sugar production, which he saw as critical to safeguarding and maintaining emancipation by tying black cultivators to their old plantations. As he did so, France's government took a more conservative turn after July 17, 1794, when the radical Jacobin government that had produced both emancipation and the terror was overthrown in a coup d'etat. While the next French regime, which came to be known as the Directory, never really considered a full reversal of the 1794 emancipation, a still powerful lobby of Caribbean planters uprooted by the Saint-Domingue insurgency began a pressure campaign rooted in the politics of racism to reclaim the Caribbean they had lost. These changes in Saint-Domingue and France helped produce, among other things, Napoleon Bonaparte's 1798 invasion of Egypt. France sent its brash young general to the Nile Delta for many reasons. Among them was the gnawing fear that Toussaint might well declare independence, well and truly depriving France of Saint-Domingue sugar, a crop that had long been cultivated in the Nile Delta and elsewhere in the Middle East. Now, as many of you know, after fleeing his collapsing occupation of Egypt, Napoleon took power in France as the result of yet another coup d'etat, this one kind of famously on 18 Brumaire, year 9 of the French Revolutionary calendar, November 9th, 1799 for us normal people. Among the many, many consequences of Napoleon's rise to the quasi-dictatorial position of first consul, and of the increasingly common and loud calls to reinstate slavery across the French Empire that flowed from conservative thinkers and ex-planters, was the document you see here in the middle and being celebrated on the right. This is Toussaint Louverture's 1801 colonial constitution. Drafted by a committee under Toussaint's direction, the Constitution reiterated Saint-Domingue's status as part of the French Empire. But it also declared that it would be governed by, quote, particular laws crafted in the colony itself. And it also made Toussaint governor for life. Faced with Toussaint's seeming recalcitrance and envisioning Saint-Domingue as the linchpin of an attempt to reassert French imperialism in the New World, Napoleon sent his brother-in-law, General Leclerc, and over 30,000 soldiers and sailors to reclaim the Caribbean for his regime and to reinstate slavery. Leclerc reached Saint-Domingue in February of 1802 and immediately launched an invasion of the colony's northern coast designed to bring Toussaint to heel. That expedition failed. After initially siding with Leclerc's invaders, much of Saint-Domingue's black and mixed-race military leadership and the wider population of black insurgents turned on the French after receiving word that Leclerc's forces had indeed reestablished slavery on the islands of Guadeloupe and Martinique, and after Leclerc seized Toussaint and shipped him to France as a prisoner, where he would die high in the Jura Mountains in April of 1803. After months of fighting and accelerating racial atrocities, as well as a devastating outbreak of yellow fever, French forces evacuated Saint-Domingue in the fall of 1803. And on January 1st, 1804, Jean-Jacques Dessalines, a one-time general in the French military turned resistance leader, issued the Haitian Declaration of Independence, making Haiti the second independent nation in the Western Hemisphere and the first state of any kind to be ruled by black men who had once been enslaved. So, what are the legacies that endure of this, the most radical of all the 18th century revolutions? It's important, I think, first and foremost, to consider Haiti itself and the ways in which an independent Haiti fit very, very awkwardly into the evolving global orders of the 19th and 20th century. But it's not the case, and here I cite the historian Julia Gaffield, who's really expressed this, I think, incredibly well. It's not the case that the existence of an independent Haiti immediately triggered a unified response from all republics and empires to isolate and subjugate the new black state for the threat it posed to economies and social orders rooted in slavery and racial hierarchy. That's just not how geopolitical rivalries, or trade for that matter, worked in the early 19th century. That all being said, a key legacy of Haitian independence, and most definitely is the deliberate and systematic impoverishment and destabilization of Haiti during the consolidation of post-revolutionary conservative rule throughout much of the Atlantic world after 1815. Here, the most important development in many respects took place in 1825, when Charles X of France, the guy you see there on your left, whose revived Bourbon dynasty had been restored to the French throne after Napoleon's final defeat at Waterloo, used his navy to force Haitian President Jean-Pierre Boyer into accepting, as a condition of diplomatic recognition, an indemnity of 150 million gold francs to be paid to France in recognition of the, quote, property, including human property, lost to French citizens during the Haitian Revolution. The story of this indemnity and the Haitian national debt it produced has been told many times, including in a recent New York Times article. Suffice it to say here that the original debt to France was renegotiated, subdivided, and resold many times over. Interest payments consumed half the Haitian state's revenues by 1898 and 80% of those revenues by 1914. In 1915, Haiti struggled to pay off American institutions that had bought up its debt, helped trigger its invasion and occupation by the United States Marines, who seized $500,000 in gold from Haiti's coffers, loaded it onto the USS Machias, which you see there on your right, and delivered it directly to what is now Citibank in New York City, which also received the dead last payment on the Haitian indemnity in 1947, which is why I don't bank at Citibank. Economists now estimate that the indemnity cost the Haitian state and its economy something like $21 billion over its lifespan, while rendering its governments unstable and dependent not only on France, but on the emerging fiscal and military power of the United States. Why? Why did this happen? Directly or indirectly, race. and Haiti's challenge to the exploitative and extractive economies of empire. And here I really mean the challenge to those economies posed by ordinary Haitians, whose idea of liberty was considerably different than the conditional and labor-dependent liberty offered by the French in 1794. Frederick Douglass, speaking at the 1893 Chicago World's Fair, was not wrong. Quote, "Haiti is black, and we have not yet forgiven Haiti for being black." The Haitian Revolution also had a profound impact on the United States. First, and most straightforwardly, it made possible the Louisiana Purchase, which in 1804 more than doubled the republic's size. Here's how. Napoleon had claimed Louisiana territory from Spain in October of 1800 via a secret treaty. His idea was to use the Mississippi River Valley, and here think the really rich grain-producing lands of places like Missouri and Arkansas and Illinois, as a breadbasket to produce food for Caribbean sugar colonies such as Guadeloupe, Martinique, and yes, Saint-Domingue, where Napoleon, in his own words, aimed to, quote, annihilate the government of the blacks while reinstating slavery. When his expedition to reclaim Saint-Domingue was defeated by Dessalines and Haitian independence declared in early 1804, Napoleon no longer had a reason to need Louisiana, and so he sold it to the Jefferson administration at a bargain price. So ironically, the Louisiana Purchase, which was made possible by an enslaved uprising and the creation of an explicitly black government, also made possible a massive expansion of slavery and the anti-black racism that went with it across what is now the southeastern United States. And as the slave power expanded across the American South and as the slave states' preponderance in the federal government grew, Haiti continued to haunt the United States. This is James Hamilton, South Carolina congressman from 1826. Quote, "Haitian independence is not to be tolerated in any form. This recognition would be fatal to our repose and produce a concussion which must either end in the annihilation of these states, meaning the United States, or the destruction of the power of its general government." And indeed, as my colleague Matt Mason knows, once you start looking for Haiti in the pre-Civil War United States, you realize it's everywhere. By the early 1850s, some Southerners want to invade Haiti and turn it into yet another slave state, augmenting not just planter pocketbooks, but enslavers' power in Washington, D.C. In 1854, the Southern-dominated federal government threatened to invade Spanish Cuba, and this might be a corollary to my students. You know, I say, don't invade Canada. Also, don't invade Cuba. Pro tip. They wanted to invade Spanish Cuba so as to prevent it from becoming, quote, a second Saint Domingo, or a second Haiti, bringing, quote, horrors to the white race and suffering the flames to extend to our neighboring shores and seriously to endanger or actually to consume the fair fabric of our union. And in 1861, when the newly formed Confederacy sent officials to the border states, such as Kentucky and Maryland, to convince them too to secede, what arguments did they use to make that case? States' rights? Nah. The defense of slavery as an institution? Not really. As the Alabama secessionist William Cooper told the state legislature of Missouri in 1861, Lincoln's election guaranteed, quote, that the time would arrive when the scenes of San Domingo, Haiti, with all their attendant horrors, would be enacted in the slave-holding states. And what were those horrors? Cooper's fellow Alabaman Stephen Hale described them this way. Whites, quote, degraded to a position of equality with free Negroes upon terms of political and social equality, exposing their wives and daughters to pollution and violation to gratify the lust of half-civilized Africans. So, as a result, it's no coincidence that, as the historian Marlena Doubt has demonstrated, it's a Haitian man, the Baron de Vasté, a great Haitian intellectual from the early 19th century, actually coins the term white supremacy, la suprématie blanche, and it migrates its way into English from his writing. But the reason that happens is because Haitians are the trigger point for white supremacy as it makes its way across the United States. Now, on the flip side of all that, the Haitian Revolution and Haitian independence become powerful touchstones for men and women of African descent throughout the Americas as they sought political liberty and personal and familial independence during the 19th century and beyond. I'm reluctant to overstate this because evidence in these sorts of cases is naturally pretty scarce. There's a good argument to be made that participants in every major slave revolt in the pre-Civil War United States, Gabriel's Revolt in Virginia in 1800, the German Coast Revolt in Louisiana in 1810, Denmark Vesey's Revolt in Charleston in 1822, Nat Turner's Rebellion, Virginia, 1832, Men and women who participated in those rebellions in each case seem to have claimed Haiti as an inspiration or as a potential destination. But beyond such dramatic acts of resistance, Haiti echoed in black communities both in the US and worldwide in quieter but still insistent ways. Out of many, many examples, take this building that you see up there on the right, situated between Choctaw and Chickasaw Avenues in McAlester, Oklahoma, one of that state's so-called black towns. Now, some African Americans had come to this part of Oklahoma as early as the 1830s as slaves of the dispossessed Choctaw. But thousands more later fled the post-Civil War Deep South to found these black towns, and some dared to dream a black-run state in what was then Indian territory. But as Jim Crow triumphed in late 19th century Oklahoma, McAllister's black residents retained a powerful sense of their belonging to a wider African diaspora of which proud Haiti was a touchstone. As a result, to ensure the proper education of their children, they, just like their friends and neighbors in Meridian and Slick, Oklahoma, named their high school Louverture High School. At once a marker of racial segregation and American policy inseparable from prejudice rooted in Haiti's history, and an expression of black hope, resistance, and power derived from the Haitian experience. And just as a note, the picture of the two girls that you see there on the bottom right, that's from a 1942 report that the Louverture High School made to the federal government based on its participation in the Schools at War program during World War II. And I'm a cynical guy, but knowing what I know about the relationship between war and military labor and black independence, I actually find that to be a really, really moving image. Now, the Haitian Revolution also fundamentally raises the stakes of empire, of democracy, of political participation all over the Atlantic world in really new ways. And I've been thinking a lot as I've been preparing for this talk about a passage from the long-lost eyewitness account of the final years of the Haitian Revolution I've recently been translating from French into English for publication. This account was written by a real piece of work named Jacques Périez. He was a French treasurer. Basically, he's an accountant in Saint-Domingue's last colonial administration. So he lived in Saint-Domingue from about 1800 to 1803 when he fled. He is also, incidentally, a snitch. He is spying on his colleagues for the Ministry of the Navy, which makes him kind of fun. But as Leclerc's expedition collapsed, Périez fled Saint-Domingue for exile in the Bahamas, where he finished his manuscript, which he hoped to publish, all 60,000 words of it, in 1804. Périez tried to assign blame for what he regarded as the avoidable travesty of Haitian independence in this way. Quote, "In France, an upheaval of principles had given rise to a system of philanthropy that had undermined the foundation of our fathers' religion, substituting in its place a dark and revolting atheism that deified crime while scandalizing wisdom and reason. This philanthropy, in seeking to level everything, destroyed the most enduring precedents. This philosophy, or rather this cruel epidemic that seemed for a time to have spread like gangrene among all peoples, wanted to make us see men where the sensible man sees only beings without understanding, differently constituted, having only the intelligence necessary for the work to which they are destined." So by philosophy, philanthropy, and even worse apparently, a system of philanthropy, Périez, I think, meant some combination of anti-slavery thought, abolitionism, and racial egalitarianism encoded into French revolutionary law. And he didn't like it. His critique lines up with, among many other statements, this quick hitter from a session of the National Convention in May of 1802, as France's attempt to reclaim Saint-Domingue, erase emancipation, and reinstate racial slavery became better known. Quote, "Let us no longer trouble the world with theories." It's common to hear that in some important sense, Edmund Burke invented what we now call conservatism in 1790 when he published Reflections on the Revolution in France. And for sure, that book responded to the heightened stakes of popular politics in the French Revolution in what we now recognize as conservative terms. The book contains lots of high-toned pleas for, quote, reverence to antiquity against a rising tide of, quote, insolent irreligion and especially unnatural egalitarianism. Now, surely Burke deserves some credit, if that's the right word, for the brand of conservatism that stitched itself into the fabric of the rapidly evolving 19th and 20th century Atlantic world. A conscious retreat from the most egalitarian and democratic impulses of the age of revolutions, an insistence on articulating and sustaining supposedly natural racial and gender hierarchies, even in the face of incremental or occasionally sudden change, a vision of empire, if not conquest, as an economic and civilizational good bound up in those natural hierarchies, and so on and so forth. But I've read a lot of material from this period, and from where I'm sitting, it makes a lot of sense to look to Haiti and to reorient our understanding of the great trajectories of modern history in the aftermath of the revolutions around this moment, when men like Jean-Baptiste Bellay, a Senegal-born, once enslaved member of the National Convention in Paris, raised the stakes of revolution, rights, and political participation in ways that not even the French Revolution, for all its iconoclasm, could have imagined. Which brings me to this painting, which I think about way too much to be healthy. It was painted by Anne-Louis Girodet, a French painter, the same artist who did Bellay's portrait in 1797, same guy. It's called The Revolt in Cairo, and it was commissioned by the Emperor Napoleon and completed in 1810. It depicts an Egyptian uprising against Napoleon's ill-fated occupying army that took place in October of 1798. It's part of a wider propaganda campaign to exalt the emperor by retconning, if that is the correct Gen Z term, his less glorious moments. And if you want a particularly gross example of this sort of propaganda, see Antoine Gros' depiction of Napoleon as Jesus at Jaffa for an especially creepy exemplar. Like a lot of things in the emerging modern age, however, Revolt in Cairo has nothing to do with the Haitian Revolution, except that it has everything to do with the Haitian Revolution. Bathed seemingly in the light of his own manliness, the painting's central figure, on the right, can't miss him, is a Mamluk. As Girodet knew well, the Mamluk story began 1,000 years earlier in the 9th century, when Muslim caliphs in Baghdad began building a military caste of enslaved Turks, Russians, and others from the Asian steppes, identifying them by the Arabic term Mamluk, or owned. In the 13th century, Egypt's Mamluks staged a revolt and claimed power for themselves, inaugurating a dynastic sultanate that would in one way or another rule Cairo for over 500 years. So, as Girodet knew, in Egypt, Napoleon had fought the descendants of medieval slaves who had become warriors, rulers, and enslavers themselves. Now that's an uncanny foreshadowing of its confrontation via Leclerc's expedition with Saint-Domingue's rebels. Girodet also placed 2 black men in Cairo, standing behind the Mamluk, and you can see him right there. Standing behind the Mamluk, one levels a pistol at the onrushing Frenchman, eyes locked, jaw set, his face a near-perfect likeness of the heroic Mamluks. Crouching beside the Mamluk's leg, the other raises a blood-stained dagger in his right hand, and in his left he holds a white man's severed head, the unmistakable symbol of slavery avenged and France's imperial order upended. Now, it's been argued that Girodet's depictions of black insurgents in the revolt in Cairo are less than flattering, paling in comparison to his epic portrait of Jean-Baptiste Bellay. They thus reflect, this argument runs, the painter's own drift away from the racial egalitarianism and the radicalism of the 1790s. And bear in mind, of course, that I graduated from the Ag College and I only took the one art history class, so, caveat emptor here, but I'm not so sure about that argumentation. My sense is that Girodet is less drifting than laying down a marker and offering a warning. Aligned in a slashing diagonal, the 3 figures on the right, the Mamluk, a slave turned warrior turned governor, and 2 armed black men, ready to answer violence for violence or already having done so, suggest not Napoleon's glory, but his defeat at the hands of Haitians who by right and by their virtues should have been France's allies. It's also worth looking closely at the onrushing French soldier who is pinwheeling in weirdly from the left, a hopelessly overdressed and two-dimensional representative of imperial France. Surely not for nothing, Girodet has shrouded his face and his eyes in shadow, rendering him at least partially blind to the scene unfolding in front of him, and most definitely oblivious to the long history of slavery, resistance, and revolution in Saint-Domingue and Haiti that was about to seal his fate. Thank you.
Thank you so much. We do have some time for discussion. We invite you to participate in that discussion. If you do have a class and you need to get to by 1, you're welcome to leave when you need to. But we will take the next 15 or 20 minutes and invite you to ask our speaker questions. If you do have a question, just please raise your hand. We've got 2 folks in the back that have a microphone, and they will bring you a microphone. We invite you to stand and just tell us your name, if you're a student, what you study here, and we will go until 1 p.m. Thank you.
Hi, so my question has to do with, you mentioned that, let's see if I can say this right. The Haitian rebellion, and eventually, they kind of took over, was kind of a signal and a spark for slaves in the United States. And that kind of had 2 effects. On one side, like the North would kind of point to that and be like, see, this is why we need to free our slaves, because if we don't free them now, they'll do it the hard way. And then the Southerners would say, like, see, this is exactly why we need to stamp down on our slaves, because this is what will happen. How many slaves were ever able to get out of the United States and go there well, actually, here's a better question. Brazil. How many slaves were able to get from Brazil to San Domingue?
Yeah, that's a great question, and I'm not sure I have an especially good answer. So it is the case that independent Haiti does become a kind of interesting magnet for certain kinds of black migration in the 19th century. So it's relatively, as far as I know, rare that, for example, enslaved people from the United States manage to make it to Haiti. It is not rare, however, that free black people, really beginning in the 1820s, 30s, and 40s, do migrate in not insubstantial numbers from U.S. cities to Haiti. So that happens fairly often. And it depends on the kind of rhythms of Haitian government and so forth. And the 19th century is a very up and down century in many respects for Haitian government. But Haiti does attract black migrants, just not escaped slaves. That's also the case, and there's lots of examples that sort of show the sort of two-faced nature of American relationships to 19th century Haiti and European relationships to Haiti too. So Jefferson, for example, attempts to blockade Haiti for the better part of a couple of years during his presidency. So what he's trying to do is sort of choke out trade and agricultural production and so forth, so as to bring the black empire to heel, more or less. Haitians tend to kind of chuckle at least a little bit at those sorts of efforts because capitalism does capitalism stuff all the time. And American merchants are more than happy to go trade in Haiti in the 1820s, 30s, and 40s for a variety of different reasons, as are people from South America. The classic example of South American engagement with Haiti takes place in 1815 when South American revolutionaries who are on the run, being ejected from the remnants of the Spanish Empire and so forth, Simón Bolívar actually takes refuge in the southern part of Haiti with Alexandre Pétion, who was the governor of that part of the former colony at that point. And the Haitians provide him with materiel, with arms and so forth to kind of further prosecute his revolution in exchange for Bolivar abolishing slavery once he establishes his republics. So like I was saying in the talk, sometimes we have this vision that as soon as Haiti becomes independent, automatically there is this sort of unified response to the existence of this new black state. And in the short term, that's just not true. That's not how, like, geopolitics and rivalries and stuff like that works. So Haitian troops, for example, in 1809, are going to fight alongside both British and Spanish troops to eject the last French army from what is now the Dominican Republic. And the British and Spanish are totally happy to engage with the Haitian state on that level. However, it is true that in the long term, the existence of a black state that sort of rejects the exploitative, in many respects, kind of politics and economics of empire is a sort of irritant to the broader imperial order. And that's among the reasons why Haitian impoverishment and destabilization in the 19th century takes the forms it does.
Hi, my name's Anne Rasband. I'm a political science major and women's studies minor. So at the beginning of the lecture, you talked about kind of some of the demographics and dynamics of the colony before the revolution. And you also mentioned how kind of like well pre-planned the revolution was. Do you feel like there's any particular aspect that made the colony particularly, like the slaves in the colony, particularly well equipped to execute that revolution more than any other colony?
Yeah, it's a good question, and I'm not sure I have a great answer because it's hard to sort of argue about something that doesn't happen in other places. But the demographics do tell part of that story. So there's a historian named John Thornton who's written pretty extensively about this, and I think, pretty persuasively. And basically, his argument is that because Saint-Domingue is so deadly to enslaved people, there is this constant churn, upwards of 20, 25, 28,000 enslaved people arriving in the colony from Africa every year during the 1780s. So as a result, 2/3 of that 500,000 enslaved people was born in Africa. And what that means is in the 1780s, the French are importing into the colony often men who have been captured in warfare in West Africa, who happen to actually be pretty good at warfare. So what they're doing, and this is part of Thornton's argument inadvertently, is they're sort of seeding their enslaved population with this group of people that is primed, that has the skills, that has the knowledge, that has all the capability to engage in a kind of broad, coordinated revolt. I also think it's the case that the Northern Plain, which is the specific place where the rebellion starts, one of the interesting things about the Northern Plain is that it's a series of sugar plantations that are basically connected by pathways. So there are places where enslaved people can meet outside of the kind of white surveillance on the plantations that allow for the kind of organization, and the organization develops over the course of months in 1791 to engage in that kind of revolt. So it has a kind of critical mass on the one hand of enslaved people, and it also has a kind of topography, a geography that allows for them to engage with each other in ways that kind of lend themselves to that sort of uprising.
Okay, was there known Haitians who were against the revolution, like there were in the French and American Revolution?
Yeah.
Like, what do we know about them? Like, is there much?
Yeah, good question. So, and it's a really interesting question, actually. Thank you, Stella. It's one of my students, naturally. She actually asked a great question. So there are plenty of people of African descent and of mixed race ancestry who engaged the Haitian Revolution in all of the complex ways that populations always engage revolutions. So to give one example, Georges Biassou, this kind of formerly enslaved insurgent leader that I kind of described earlier, and where the enslaved guy goes and bumps into him in his camp and so on and so forth. Biassou winds up running afoul of the Louverture regime. He eventually leaves Saint-Domingue in 1795. He's sort of run out of town. And he winds up, you can still visit where he died, in St. Augustine, Florida, of all places, as a kind of quasi-military commander and, get this, a slaveholder. So it's important to remember, and I'm always trying to kind of preach this to my students, like the people, whether it's the American Revolution, the French Revolution, the Haitian Revolution, the people who participate in those revolutions are not defined necessarily by the group identities that we like imposing on them. These are fully articulated human people with all sorts of foibles and misgivings about what's happening. So absolutely, it is the case that there are plenty of folks who participate in the Haitian Revolution who wind up being against, for example, the seizure of power, the Toussaint Louverture engineers in between 1794 and 98, the creation of his kind of Louverturian state and so forth. There are plenty of folks who oppose him on many, many different grounds. There are lots of people, again, ordinary Haitians, who don't particularly like him because he tries, for reasons that are understandable, to tie them back to their old plantations and to restart sugar production. Now, if you are a formerly enslaved person, I wager that is not your idea of personal independence and liberty. So the answer is yes. There are all sorts of kind of factions that develop during this process. It's not a kind of straightforward and necessarily racially defined process either.
I don't really think I need one. I'm plenty loud, but so you just talked about some of the factions that kind of grow out of this response, and you mentioned earlier there is a class of free blacks who are part of the planter class.
Yeah.
And although you did just say they're all individuals making their own decisions, as a general trend, they obviously have more rights than the blacks who were enslaved, but also are facing the racism that is rampant at this time. What is the general trend in their response to this revolution and in kind of what they do?
Yeah, great question. And in a lot of respects, free people of color are sort of the hinge of the Haitian Revolution. So you're absolutely right. They have, especially during the second half of the 18th century, free people of color, have been subject to more and more and stricter racial prejudice that gets built into colonial law in Saint-Domingue. So their capacity for movement within Saint-Domingue society is being restricted just as the Haitian Revolution begins. So is there a general rule? I'm not sure how I would articulate it. So in the first place, there are plenty of free people of mixed race ancestry who, when the French Revolution begins, they read the room and they go back to Paris and they say, hey, guess who you need now? You need us. Right? You need the people you've been persecuting, that you've been shunting into military employment. You need us to maintain slavery in this really profitable colony. And that's a powerful argument, and for a time it does resonate back in the metropolis. It is also a case that there are plenty of mixed-race folks who, when they see what the French state is doing in terms of its attempts to combat the insurgency, that they side, in effect, with their racial identity over their sort of class identity. So, like I mentioned to you, when poor Amboise gets kidnapped by the insurgents and he gets schlepped into all the insurgent camps, well, who does he meet? Well, he meets Biassou, who himself is a formerly enslaved person of African descent. When they take him to the next place, who does he meet? Oel. Well, Oel is a mixed-race person, right, who had been a free person prior to the events of the uprising of 1791. So I'm going to give the kind of historian's answer that makes you, in particular, and people in general roll their eyes, which is it's more complicated than that. But it is important to kind of think in terms of people's individual interests and so forth, because those do tend to win out. Yeah.
My name is Michael Forville, and I'm studying neuroscience, and I have a minor in Africana Studies.
Great.
And I am from Haiti.
Great.
Thank you for this amazing presentation. And as you were presenting, one thing that came to mind is the different tensions that have been, that we've seen in the US between, I'm talking about racial tensions.
Sure.
And I know that around the 1950s, 1915, that's when the U.S. Had an occupation of Haiti, and you mentioned how the Haitian Revolution had some impact on how they were viewing different people of African descent in the United States. And I've been thinking about, is that occupation connected somehow to the Haitian Revolution?
Yeah, I think it is, and great question. Thank you for asking it. So the U.S. occupation, which runs from 1915 to 1934, um, it, there's many origins and many reasons, rationales for which the President of the United States, Woodrow Wilson at the time, does the occupation. I think the primary one, based on my understanding, is the Haitian state's struggle to pay the interest on the debt that it owes to a whole host of American institutions who have bought Haitian state debt over the years. So I think that is one of the primary rationales for doing what they do. It is also the case that by the time we get to 1915, the kind of construction of really powerful racial identifications, the legal building out of racial segregation in the United States, especially, but not exclusively in the United States South, all of those trends are related. They're tied back to, in some important way or another, the existence of a viable black state in the Caribbean. And it's important to try to understand, as sort of unpleasant as it is to contemplate, how scary the existence of an independent black Haiti, an independent, successful black Haiti for much of the 19th century, how scary the existence of that state was to people in the American South and elsewhere who had a vested interest in maintaining strict racial hierarchies in the United States. Haiti is the grain of sand in the pearl. It is the irritant to that version of racial thinking that predominates in the United States. It's important to note, too, that Wilson, the President of the United States during World War I and so forth, is a Virginian, among many, many other things. And look, what can I tell you? He hosts at the White House a screening of the film Birth of a Nation, the great sort of pro-KKK box office hit of 1916 or whatever it was. And so his racial proclivities and the tendencies of his administration are definitely to kind of tamp down any possibility that Haiti's success or existence might be communicated to people of color in the United States. So yes, I do think, and this was part of the point I was trying to make at the end of the talk, that the trajectory of the 19th century is toward a kind of more rigid conception of race and a more aggressive building of race into law. And I think we do ourselves a disservice if we don't recognize that the existence of men like Toussaint Louverture and of an independent Haiti is always in the back or front of people's minds when they're engaged in that kind of politics. Okay.
Oh, I'm wondering about the name Haiti. Where does it come from? Is it French, or why did the slaves, the recently
Yeah.
emancipated ones choose that name?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's a really good story. So Haiti is the indigenous word for the island of Hispaniola. So among the things that Jean-Jacques Dessalines does in that document right there, which is the original kind of copy of the Haitian Declaration of Independence, is, and you might note that the declaration is actually on behalf of what Dessalines called the Armée Indigène, which just means indigenous army. So part of what Dessalines is doing is he's reclaiming, number one, Haiti for, symbolically anyway, its original inhabitants. And he talks about himself and the black inhabitants of Haiti as the heirs of the Taíno who were essentially annihilated by the Spanish. And he regards himself, and there's a great book that has a title that's related to this. He says at one point, "I have avenged the New World." Like, I am vengeance, right? And to cement that statement and to cement the kind of connection between indigenous people and black people, who are the backbone of an independent Haiti, he takes an indigenous name.